In this video with the AnKing, I'm going to go over ERAS, or ERAS as some people say it. And that's the actual application to residency in the United States. If you need help with any of this process, please just let me know. I'd also appreciate if you like these videos to subscribe to our channel. But we've got a Patreon, we've got individualized help, tutoring, whatever it may be, and then we're always sharing tips on our social media channels. Now, I actually took all of the data from interviewing and put it all into this document here. Now, keep in mind, I applied to dermatology, which is very different than applying to other specialties. So I applied very broadly. Most of you will not apply to this many schools. I also applied to preliminary years, which a lot of you won't end up doing, but just so you get a general idea of what things look like, you can see this is how many I applied to. The add-on section down here, that's just because I applied to some prelim years after the fact. I got an interview at a derm location, and then they offered me an interview, and I just had to pay for it, basically. But you can see the majority of the schools ghosted me. They never responded. So don't expect that you'll get a response from most of these schools. And then you can kind of see how these things go. So like with the derm interview here, those places they interviewed me at the same time. I was virtual, so many of you will be in person, and things will be different. My understanding is that that's how it is. But just some general timeline. This is for my year, so keep in mind the dates will be different when you apply. But generally around September, October is when things open up and you submit your actual application. And then in October, that's when they can start looking at things, and a lot of people will get their interviews in October, but some are later. Orthopedics and dermatology tend to do it very late, and they're doing their interviews in January. So I actually didn't finish or figure out most of my interviews until late in November, which a lot of people, pediatrics and family medicine applicants were already done. So it just depends. And then you match in March. And so the Monday where it shows on here is March 14th. On that Monday, what happens is you find out whether you matched or didn't match. And then SOAP begins during that week. And on Friday is when you actually find out where you're going. Anyway, that's how it goes. Other matches that are not the ERAS application, the San Francisco match for the ophthalmology applicants. There's a urology match. There's a military match. And then plastic surgery is kind of doing ERAS, kind of doing their own thing. And my understanding is in future years, they're going to just be doing their own thing. But just so you have an idea, if you're doing those specialties, things will look different and be different. Now, the sections for ERAS are as follows. So there's your personal information. There's all the documents that you will need to upload. There's a bunch of stuff just about you, like what languages are you fluent in, where did you do your bachelor's degree in your medical school, all of that stuff. And then there's a bunch of other sections like your hobbies, your honors, and then the experiences section, that's the big thing. That's the meat of the application, and I'll go more into detail with that. But there's those three sections. It's either a work activity, it's a volunteer activity, or a research activity, and then your publications, and I'll talk about that in a second. But before I get into that, I'm going to go into ERAS and actually show you how this works first. Okay, here it is. Here's the actual application. You can see what it's like. And you can see that there's all sorts of stuff that gets uploaded by other people. You can track the status of it. This is basically your dashboard. Now, unfortunately, because I've already applied, I can't see a lot of the application stuff here, but you could click into this and it would have the personal information and other information and stuff like that. I'll show you in a second on my actual application. Then there's documents. So, for example, you can upload your personal statements. Go watch that video in this playlist as well. I have a lot of information, but you can see I customized my personal statement here for different programs. I had 44 different personal statements, and you upload all of them. Your letters of recommendation are the same. Additional documents are things you have to upload, like your transcripts and stuff like that, which may get uploaded by your school, maybe get uploaded by you. There's the programs tab here where you can search for programs. I really like this one. It makes it really easy. So for me, I would go to dermatology, and then you can filter training based off, what do you want? So if I wanted advanced programs only, for example, I applied to pediatric prelim years, so I did pediatrics, and then I did just preliminary years. You can see here's all of the programs. You can get information about them. You can click on the program, get information. You'll need this when you make your rank lists, and I made a video on that. Lots of information, your contact email for whoever it may be, all sorts of really useful stuff here. You can see the programs that you applied to. You save the programs first. Down here, so you would select the program and then save it. and then you can apply. And basically you have applied when you have paid. And then you're done. But you can't go back and change your application after you've certified this first part. So that's why it's not available for me. So once you certify it, like that's it. And then you have Message Center where people can email you, and it's set up so that I get an email if that happens as well. And then interviews, I made a whole video on scheduling interviews and go into this tab a little bit more. But what I wanted to focus on here is writing those experiences I was talking about and how that works. So I showed you basically everything else that's going to be useful. I'll go over here. This is my actual application. I've redacted a lot of information just for privacy. But again, please, be respectful. This is my actual life here that you're about to see. But you can see there's a lot of just basic information about me, my numbers, things like, do you have a BLS certification? Are you board certified in something else? Whatever, all sorts of things like that. If you have a medical license, where your education came from. This is where your honors and awards. And by the way, this is basically what the schools are downloading. When they download your application, this is what it looks like. So it looks like this, and then you can see my undergraduate degree. This is what it looks like with a work experience. So you can see you're going to be able to input your average hours per week. You're going to be able to put a description in. I would not recommend making these as long as possible. Remember, they have to go through a lot. And short and sweet is really easy. For example, on some of my things where I was like a medical student tutor, I don't need to explain what tutoring is and what I did. Like every doctor understands that, right? So I went and highlighted here to talk about why this was important, why this is going to make me into a better applicant, a better resident, how I want to use this in my future, etc. So that's kind of what I would recommend. I also put links into mine, and they actually are hyperlinks that you can click on that work. And I was surprised during my interviews that people actually did click on it. They went and watched the YouTube channel. I had a video here of me singing and dancing, and I had a YouTube video of that, and I put it on here. So I was really impressed. But these are just like kind of some facts and things I want you all to see of how that's working. But again, like being a medical assistant in dermatology, everybody knows that. But I put, this is why, and this is part of my story. That's important. Now you cannot order these work experiences or anything. ERAS does it all for you. I think it's based off of the date of when you started and goes backwards based on your start date. And that's kind of unfortunate because I wish you could put the ones you care about more at the top, but that's just how it is. You can see again, like every single time I was putting like, why is this important? Why did I list a job that I had in high school on my application for residency? Well, this is why. And so pick and choose. Don't put everything in your life on there. Pick things you want to talk about, things that are important. So now we get into the volunteer experiences, same things. And I highlighted all of these just so you could see, like same thing with this last sentence and tying it in. What's the real story? And then if I get down further, we'll get into the research experience. Almost there. Here's that one with the volunteer experience. You can see I put a YouTube link to me singing and dancing. And people actually went and watched it. So take a risk. It worked. And here's the research experiences. So you can write about, I worked with this doctor. I did these projects. And so I actually had 2 projects in Ghana with this doctor here. And so I wrote, we're going to submit this because it wasn't submitted yet. But I plan to submit a paper with our findings and stuff. Like, let them know. This is your opportunity to explain things beyond what is put in the publication section. And then there you go. Keep going down. Basically, again, putting websites. We are planning to submit this in October because we hadn't submitted it yet. So things like that are really important, but also talking about like, why is this research important to you? How are you going to use it in the future associated to this career? And then if I keep scrolling, I think that's it. Yeah. And this is the research part. So I'll go on and talk about that for a second, and then we'll come back. Okay, the next section is research. And when you have publications, they can be submitted as one of these. And so you can choose one of them. And the idea, obviously, the top one, the peer-reviewed journals, abstracts are going to be really, really good. But you can submit abstracts and articles. And I had some times where I got an abstract on a paper and a poster and actually a publication in a journal. And you can list all of those. Notice that there's also other articles. There's oral presentations, poster presentations. There's non-peer-reviewed online things. So if you write a blog or something like that, you can list that on here. So a lot of people will say, oh, I have 30 pubs on my application. That doesn't mean they have 30 research publications in the New England Journal of Medicine. That's just like inhumane and not possible. But you might have a bunch of posters, a bunch of oral presentations. You might even be including some of those from your undergraduate degree, and all of those factor in. And then even some of these non-peer-reviewed stuff. And I can, in my video on the CV, I talk about this a little bit, but I can also go and show how I did that on ERAS. This is what it looks like when you're submitting. You'll put all the information in just like this, and then notice this is other than published. If it were like published in the journals and articles, you can say it will ask you for the PubMed ID, so make sure it's in a PubMed indexed journal. If it's other than published, you can put submitted or accepted. So if you've submitted a research article literally the day before you submit this, you can list it on here. And I did have, for example, this research right here was submitted at the time of my ERAS application, and it wasn't accepted or anything, but I was still able to list it in there. So with that, I'm going to go show you the research section of ERAS. Okay, now that I'm on the publications, this is basically what they're downloading after you've submitted it all. Now notice the first part here is articles and abstracts. It lumps them both together, but it's very easy to find which ones are actual articles based off the PubMed IDs. So they're gonna notice that. That's why I say it's good to get it in a PubMed index journal. Now this one here, this is just an abstract that was submitted to this conference, and they publish it in their journal after. And you can see I have a couple of those. They all get lumped in together, which is kind of nice. And some of these I even had a poster that I put on here as well, a little bit down under the poster presentation, and you can see. So, but then there's these ones, which are your other than published, and you can see they're submitted, accepted, accepted. So having something accepted, you know, that's a big deal. They realize, oh, that's already in. And then poster presentations are going to be good too. And I think it's okay, you know, to show your work. Some of these got canceled because of COVID, and I just wrote that in there. Like, I had a poster that was accepted. Nobody mentioned it. Nobody got mad at me or anything. Like, so if you have extraneous situations, like, go ahead and, you know, include that, explain it, whatever it may be. Don't feel like you can't put that in your application at all. And then oral presentations. I never actually did one at a research conference, but I did this oral presentation at our medical school. We made an abstract actually and submitted it and had to get accepted and whatever. But I did it every single year as a med student, so I listed that. And then this is an online publication. It is actually peer reviewed that I submitted a photo to this bioethics journal. And then other articles, these were I wrote for our program here at the University of Utah, and they put it up on the website and had articles, so I put that on there. Like I said, you could do blog posts, whatever it may be. If you're actually publishing material that's going out into the intellectual world, I feel like you should be able to list it here somehow. So that's kind of that part of the application. And then I didn't mention this earlier on the last one, but I'll just jump into it because it's kind of at the end here. There's the language fluency part, which I got asked about this all the time, so definitely put that on there if you speak another language. And then the hobbies and interests I got asked about all the time. Every single interview this came up. Make it fun, make it exciting, put something good in there. Like I put scuba diving in there, and I got asked about that all the time. And I love scuba diving. Country swing dancing, people asked about. But don't just put like sports, hiking, and traveling, right? Don't talk about that. Give me a little bit more juice to that, because people are going to ask about this, especially if you have something really interesting. And then that's basically it. That's your application. Okay, another section is the MSPE. Now, this is a section that you don't actually upload, but I wanted to bring this up because it does go into your application, and places you apply and interview at will see this. Now, please understand this is my personal information that I'm sharing with you, so please be respectful about sharing it and talking about it. But you can see here, this is one of my clerkships. This is how my school prepared things to present. I don't know if all schools are the same. It also has my remaining fourth year schedule, so you can apply to a bunch of or sign up for a bunch of courses to take your fourth year. You can drop them later, but notice that they will see what courses you're going to take in the future. And then you can kind of read through this briefly if you want to pause the video and see. But this is comments that were made on my rotation, and then you see my grade. And like where I stood compared to other people. So they get a decent amount of information about your clinical years, and I think it's a very important part. Another thing that they submit is your noteworthy characteristics. Now, I helped with this and kind of gave them ideas of what I want to do, but this gets submitted by the school, by your dean or whoever's in charge of that. And so they're ultimately up to it. But I did do this. And if you go back to my video on crafting your narrative, which is part of this playlist as well, it's 3 noteworthy characteristics. And I talk about in that video how for your narrative, you want to have 3 separate things. And I recommend that because you have 3 like main key points. What do you want people to remember? And I would craft your noteworthy characteristics around that as well as the rest of your application. Now, there is the supplemental application, which happened my year for the first time, and it sounds like it will be in future years, so I'm going to touch on points. There were a few small essays. They were so small that they were like insignificant. It allowed enough characters for like 2 sentences. I felt like it was worthless. Nobody ever mentioned it in my application, but obviously don't do a poor job on that. And then the geographic and preference signals were a thing, and here's a picture of what the geographic areas were. They split the United States into 9 areas and you could signal 3. So just so you get an idea. Here's what my 5 notable experiences were. As you can see, it's very small, just a couple sentences each. All of these activities were also listed in my ERAS application, so I don't feel like this was super important, but regardless, you can see these were my drafts. Unfortunately, the supplemental application didn't let me download the actual thing, so I don't know what the actual thing is. And then geographic signals, I showed you the map of that. This is kind of what I did and what I would recommend is I got all of the areas and then I looked at schools that I was interested in and wrote down like which schools are in those areas and then also considered where do I truly want to live. But for me, for example, I live in Utah and I love Utah and wanted to stay here. But it just didn't make sense to signal here because I knew I was going to get an interview at my home program when there weren't really other programs in this geographic area. Whereas my wife and I really did want to move to North Carolina, and South Carolina, Florida, that area. And so we ultimately decided to just send a preference signal there. And as you can see, there were a lot of schools that I was very interested in that area as well. So I kind of used this to help guide my decision, but also take into account that there are some things that you might have really strong connections at some schools. For example, I had a pretty strong connection at Geisinger and Penn State in Hershey. Because my wife lived there and I knew I could write about that in my personal statement. And so I ultimately decided not to signal this area for a geographic standpoint. I did send a preference signal to Geisinger, but I didn't do that because I felt like then I was really only signaling 2 schools. And I felt like I could open myself up a little better if I did it elsewhere. Some people also just chose to not do a preference signal. I did end up getting a lot of interviews where I signaled in these areas, so I feel like it was useful. The next thing, just as you're doing these preference and geo signals, so the preference signals, you could pick 3 specific schools for dermatology. I believe it was 5 for internal medicine and surgery. And it might have been 3 or 4 for ENT. At the time, but that's going to be subject to change. I felt like those schools were very key, and I would recommend choosing schools that are not. You could do 1 reach school, but don't do all of them as reach schools. Do ones that are very realistic, ones that you want to go to. Watch my video on personal statements in this playlist, and I talk about how I actually wrote into my personal statement about the preference signals, so that people read those even after this whole part was over. But you can see they actually open it up and say like why do you want to do the geographic areas? And you could write a paragraph. These are just drafts. I don't have the final version that I submitted. But just so you get an idea of what it's like. And then with the preference signals for the schools, you didn't get to write an essay. But that's why I included it in my personal statement. So that's kind of it for the ERAS application and supplemental. Hopefully that was helpful.
Thanks for learning with the AnKing. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel here, as well as follow us on Facebook, Instagram, or Patreon. That is at AnKingMed. Also, feel free to reach out via email or check out our website, ankingmed.com, for more tips and tricks.